So we are live and recording. I'm going to go over to Facebook Live. So welcome people as you're joining our Zoom webinar with Roberto Rodriguez from the Seal Cove Auto Museum. I'm just switching over to Facebook Live so we can stream on that platform as well. So if you can be patient with us for just a moment, we'll get started in a minute. All right, looks like we are all set on Facebook Live. So thank you for your patience. I'm going to share my screen next. So many steps. All right, so I want to welcome Roberto Rodriguez with the Seal Cove Auto Museum to our Chebacco chat. This is our 37th Chebacco chat in our series, where we talk to authors and scholars and people who are doing really interesting history about the work that they're doing and how that connects with Mount Desert Island. I'm really excited to have this conversation today because it overlaps with my previous position at the Seal Cove Auto Museum, where Roberto and I had an opportunity to work together for a number of years and had a lot of fun together. I'd like to thank Bar Harbor Bank and Trust for their continued sponsorship of this series. It's been a really meaningful thing to have their support to be able to continue to provide these free webinars and to bring in great historians and storytellers such as Roberto. This presentation that we're going to talk about today related to the 1913 Peugeot and the collection of the Seal Cove Auto Museum stems from an article that Roberto wrote for our 2018 edition of Chebacco called Beholdings. That was really focused on the treasures that we have here in the various collections on Mount Desert Island. And I think a lot of people were surprised to learn about and see this really remarkable automobile. But more than just the beauty and the elegance of the car itself is the history that Roberto, as a curator, really dug into and found some pretty remarkable things. So I'm going to just start off by asking you, Roberto, to tell us about Henri Labordette and these remarkable automobiles.
Well, these remarkable automobiles we refer to as skiffs because they're built like and look like a boat. Mahogany finished, internal ribbing, brass studs to hold the external strips of mahogany. And you can see here, they absolutely have this kind of boat-like shape. Henri Labordette himself was a master coach builder. His father and grandfather had started the tradition of building carriage bodies. I think his grandfather had started out as a blacksmith and that moved into building carriages. His father specialized in automobiles, built a great reputation for the firm, and Henri took over the company at the age of 22 after his father's death and continued to build on its reputation, building these amazing automobiles. The drawing that you see in the upper left corner, that is a rendering of the very, very first skiff-like automobile that Henri Labordette built. And it was for the Chevalier de Kiev, French sportsman, amateur racer who loved to row boats. And he shows up one day at Labordette's workshop and asks him if he could build a boat that looked like a car that looked like a boat and had this wooden body on it. And Labordette sort of shrugs his shoulders and says, well, I can do it, but I don't know. I mean, structurally, I can't put doors in. And it's going to be a very difficult build. I've never built something like that before. And the Chevalier says, "Oh, that's fine. Just go ahead, give it a try." And but what about the doors? Bernadette says. Chevalier says, "Well, it doesn't matter. I'll just jump into the car, you know." But Monsieur le Chevalier, how, how will the ladies get in the car? Ah, the Chevalier said, "I shall lift them up by the waist and put them into the car, and I shall see their legs." And let me tell you, in 1912, when this happened, that was a big deal to see a lady's legs. So he builds this car for the Chevalier, and it of course creates a sensation in France, and it's shown at all the most influential and important salons, and the orders start to roll in, including the order for the magnificent Peugeot skiff that we have at the Seal Cove Auto Museum.
So the name of your article is Sing Us a Song, Jimmy. So we know that this skiff-mobile was built at some point and purchased at some point, but why Sing Us a Song, Jimmy? Why did you frame your story about this remarkable automobile around this individual here?
Well, because Jimmy, or James Melton, was the secret to uh, finding out the full provenance of this automobile. James Melton himself was a very popular tenor. Uh, Popular songs. He dreamed of performing an opera, and he actually did. He finally did perform at the Metropolitan. He had a beautiful voice. He appeared in a few really, really cheesy Hollywood movies. He was a big star in the 1920s and 1930s, and he was a passionate car collector. Um, he had a museum first near his home in Connecticut, and then later moved down to Florida and built an extraordinary museum. It was known as Autorama. It had all sorts of incredible exhibits and displays in it. Usually the cars sort of set into diorama-like settings with wax figures in costume. Uh, the museum featured a cyclorama, which I always love the idea of this, which was a 360-degree painting that depicted the history of the United States. And people would come into the theater, take a seat, lights would light up the various sections of the history. The voice of Lowell Thomas did the narration. Lowell Thomas was a famous announcer in those days, and patriotic songs sung by James Melton would fill the studio. Um, Gosh, he was the first guy to sing "Take Me Home to Indiana" at the Indianapolis 500. Um, he showed his cars all over the United States. Uh, he was a great friend of President Eisenhower's. He was quite a personality. And I found out about James Melton through a dear friend of the museum, Curtis Blake. Now, a lot of the Mount Desert folks who are listening in today, especially those who have connections with Northeast Harbor, will remember the name of Kurt Blake. He gave the funds, for instance, to build the municipal building in Northeast Harbor. Uh, a wonderful philanthropist, a delightful joy of a man. He was 92 years old when I met him. He had made his fortune. He and his brother had founded the Friendly's Ice Cream Company. And he would come to the museum and he would tell me about the early days of car collecting. And he would mention James Melton. And it turned out that he owned a farm very close to my home in Vermont here. And once he knew that I lived in Vermont, that's where my home was, he asked me whether I would be interested in meeting James Melton's daughter. And he connected me, and here she is. That's Margot Melton, not James Melton's daughter, who lives also quite close by in the town of Norwich. Turns out we're exactly the same age. Sorry, Margot, if you're listening in. No, we're the same age. We were born the same year. I think within minutes of each other, so we always remember each other's birthday, and we became acquainted. And I was able to invite Margot to the Seal Cove Auto Museum a couple of times. The first time she came, and you see her seated here beside her father's magnificent Peugeot, and she told us the wonderful stories about her father and his car collecting. It was a great day. And it was through her then that I became interested in James Melton, got a hold of a book that he had written, his autobiography. And by gosh, that autobiography shows a picture of the Peugeot. So now I knew for sure that it was James Melton who would own this magnificent automobile.
So, as a historian, you have a tendency to, take any little lead that you can and start to pick away at it and see if you can, unravel a bigger story. So here you've taken one lead and you've, sort of teased it apart from a little bit, trying to unravel it a little more. But it led you to more interesting questions, which I think I found really interesting in your research. And so, James Melton received the car and you hypothesized he might have received it as a gift. And so who would be in a position to give such an incredible car? Must have been an intriguing question for yourself as you were thinking about this history.
Well, of course, I knew it was James Melton's car, but the question always was there, where did James Melton get it? And you think about the kind of person who would have owned a magnificent skiff like this and a very expensive, very valuable car. It would have been a wealthy individual. And again, I go back to James Melton's autobiography because there's a picture of the car in the book. There is a little description of it and this wonderfully cryptic note that he said, I had received it from a Mr. Leeds of Oyster Bay, New York. Right, okay, Oyster Bay, Leeds, that's interesting. I wonder if that's that's a clue. I did a little bit of research online and I found a William Bateman Leeds. And my gosh, I checked with Margot and she had her father's Rolodex. And sure enough, listed in the Rolodex was the name William Bateman Leeds Jr., Oyster Bay, New York. And now I knew I had found the original owner of the car. So here we see young Billy Leeds, born in 1902. His father was known as the Tin Plate King, one of the wealthiest men in America. He had made a fortune off of his tin plating business and then had invested with some of his partners in the Rock Island, Pennsylvania Railway, just piles and piles of money. Sadly, though, he died when young Billy Leeds was about 8 years old, and young Leeds inherits about $40 million of money back then, which today would be at least $1 billion. So he became the poor little rich boy, this little kid, incredibly wealthy. Just as a total aside, it's interesting to know that James Melton also owned, and it was in the museum for many years, a peerless automobile that belonged to Doris Duke. And she was also known as the poor little rich girl. So we had the poor little rich girl's car and the poor little rich boy's car at the museum at one time. So anyway, Billy Leeds gets this incredible amount of money. I love the picture of him there. I think that was his 11th birthday, surrounded by these extraordinary toys. I think an antique dealer would kill to own any one of them. Led an amazing and weird and wonderful life, young Billy. A number of years after his father died, when young Billy is 11 years old, mother decides that she wants to remarry. And she did what a lot of incredibly wealthy American women did in those days. She decides she's going to become what was referred to as a dollar princess, which means she was going to go to Europe and snag on to some penniless royal, get a title, and live, this amazing life in a castle in Europe. So she takes off to Europe to look for a husband, and she moves her son into one of her estates, actually it was in Montclair, New Jersey, with 20 servants, detectives to protect him, and a French car, chauffeur, and footman. And I believe, I can't prove it, but I believe that is when the Peugeot was given to Billy Leeds. The dates work out. And I can imagine a doting mother seeing a car that looked like a boat and knowing that her son would adore something like that. And so to appease him while she's in Europe and he's abandoned back in the house with the 20 servants, she buys this amazing automobile. And young Billy Leeds gets it. You know, that's speculation, but it's possible. Now, let's move forward a few years. Billy Leeds goes to visit his mother when he's 21 years old. Unfortunately, mother has been diagnosed with cancer. And while Billy is in Europe visiting mother, he meets this incredible princess. She's Greek. She's the Princess Xena of Greece. And in 24 hours, that's how long the romance lasted, they're married. She's 17 years old, right? He's 21, she's 17. He marries his princess. Supposedly, mother took to bed and cried for 3 days because the children were so young. But, this obviously caused an absolute sensation. Here is this, a princess, this multi-millionaire or billionaire in those days, who owned yachts, fleets of them, entertained lavishly. Everything that young Billy and his bride did made the newspapers. It was, they were a sensation. Absolutely, every time they would come back to the United States, it would make the front page of the social columns. Anytime he went on board his boat, it would make the social columns. She flew airplanes, an adventurous, it would make the social columns. On and on and on. And, they led this storybook life. And you can see in the array of pictures, his yacht, this is his yacht, the 247-footer, had a crew, I think, of 150.
Wow.
Just your modest little yacht. They would go back and forth from Europe to Oyster Bay in this boat. And as I said, they entertained all the time. And up in the upper right-hand corner of the photo array, you can see a picture of Fred Astaire and his sister Adele. They were frequent visitors, good friends. There is a wonderful newspaper account about the day that they were visiting, and Adele got into a small launch, probably to go out to the Mona, and the launch caught on fire. And
no.
Jimmy Leeds jumped into the water and saved her. She actually suffered some fairly serious burns, but
Wow.
An adventure every day at the place. You can see another character there clutching onto a machine gun. That's Ernest Hemingway with his son. He was a good friend of Billy Leeds, and the story about the machine gun is that Leeds had bought a Thompson submachine gun, that's the famous gangster one, to defend the boat. It was just one of the weapons on board the boat. And Ernest Hemingway just took one look at the Tommy gun and thought that was the coolest thing he'd ever seen. Leeds, being very generous, gave it to him. And there's still stories to this very day in the fishing villages in Cuba about Hemingway going down and shooting sharks with a Thompson submachine gun. That's the gun. So as I say, a storybook life.
Well, not quite storybook. His marriage didn't last, as young romance sometimes doesn't. You have some interesting stories about why their marriage collapsed and what were the kind of forces behind that.
Well, the marriage, didn't really actually last that many years. They did manage to have a daughter. And what's lovely is that I've been able to track down, I guess it's Billy Leeds's and Princess Zena's great-great-granddaughter. She lives here in Burlington, Vermont. I've had a chance to talk to her on the phone. And the promise is that once we can all travel safely again, she's going to come to Maine and visit the Seal Cove Museum and have a look at her great-grandfather's or great-great-grandfather's car.
Wonderful.
So they started to have some problems. Billy Leeds was spending more and more time aboard his boat. Princess Zena wanted to spend more time with her social friends and peers in Europe. So, they were spending less time together. But I think what really tore the marriage apart, as bizarre as this may seem, was that his wife, um, who had actually known the real Anastasia Romanoff, was taken in by the lady who was in those days passing herself off as the real Anastasia. She was convinced that this was the real McCoy, and she invited this woman to come and live at their home in Oyster Bay. Now, that may ring a bell with some of the folks listening in today. There was a movie made a number of years ago about Anastasia. I think there was a more recent animated movie of all things done. There was been a Broadway play telling the story of Anastasia Romanoff. And that old movie that I mentioned was the story of this woman who professed to be Anastasia, who had not been killed along with the rest of her brothers and sisters and her mother and father, but had survived. It turns out, of course, she was a total fraud. But anyway, Princess Zena was convinced she was the real McCoy. Well, Billy Leeds despised the woman. She was tyrannical as could be. She lorded it over everybody in the house. Um, and he finally threw her out. And I think that was the final straw. After that, Billy and the princess were divorced, and Billy retires to his boat to enjoy life, but the adventures continue. So it turns out that one day another little tiny boat is seen heading towards the Mona, his big yacht. And as it gets closer, the boat starts to rock up and down, back and forth, back and forth. And my gosh, the passenger falls into the water. So, well, of course, Billy Leeds immediately sends out a boat to save this poor person who had, fallen into the ocean, and brings this person back to the boat. And on board comes the beautiful Olive. And my gosh, the sparks fly, and they spend some time together. It took a couple of years, but they do finally marry. And so Billy Leeds remarries this lovely young lady that you see here.
So,
Yeah.
oh, sorry. Yes, I was just going to say. So we've established that Leeds is definitely well connected and has, a very prominent and public social set. So how much do you know about the relationship that might have formed between Billy Leeds and James Melton?
Well, with James Melton, I'm pretty sure that the relationship really gets back to the time that he was entertaining lavishly at their home. And he did at some point obviously invite James Melton probably to one of the social gatherings at the house. Here we can see James Melton in an ad for RCA Victor, a lovely picture. I love that picture of him with Rex the dog and his little Titillon Bouton motorette. He invites Melton, and Melton gets wind of the fact that there's 100 cars in storage in the boathouse. And of course, being a car collector, I'm sure said, "Oh, can I have a look?" He goes down there, and I'm assuming spots the Peugeot. Now, again, I can't prove this, but knowing what would have been going on from what I've read about Leeds and celebrities being at his home and entertaining and so on, I wouldn't be at all surprised that Melton Melton volunteers to sing a song for the guests, holds forth, does a beautiful song, and again, I mentioned that Leeds was extremely generous. I wouldn't be at all surprised that at that point he gave the Peugeot to James Melton. There is actually documented in Melton's biography the story of him being given a car for a song. He doesn't refer specifically to the Peugeot, but he does refer to a Pierce Arrow, which we just happen to have on loan and on display at the Seal Cove Museum right now. And I
Wow.
hope it'll be there for a while yet. So there is the song that the book says that Jamie Melton sang the song for on at the museum. It's a magnificent automobile. And
Mm.
as I say, I'm pretty sure that, that's the way this story would have unfolded. Oh, to have been a fly on the wall back in those days, or better yet, a guest at one of Jimmy Leeds's galas at his home in Oyster Bay must have been quite something.
No kidding. So you've traced the car from its original owner to James Melton. So what happens when James Melton gets the car and he's got this great, incredible museum that you mentioned at the beginning of our talk? Sort of what do we know about how the car was transferred away from James Melton eventually, and what happens?
Well, James Melton's Autorama Museum, when it first opened, was wildly successful. Huge visitation. But it was built just around the time that the interstates were being built in the United States. And when the interstate through Florida goes through, it turns out to be miles away from the town where the museum was located. And suddenly the visitation drops off. You have that. So the income from the museum is now diminished greatly. And all of this also happens when people just weren't listening to sweet tenors like they used to. Elvis Presley was the big star then. So those things combined to make life difficult for James Melton. And unfortunately, he dies at a young age. And his wife now is left with some debts, and it needs to sell off some of the cars in the collection. The Rockefeller family ended up buying a number of them, and a gentleman by the name of Dr. Samuel Shear ends up buying some others. Now, Sam Shear and James Melton were the very best of friends. They knew each other from car meets and from collecting automobiles. And in fact, there's a trophy that is awarded, which is the James Melton Trophy, which was donated by Dr. Samuel Shear. I think it's given out by the Veteran Car Club of America. So Dr. Shear gets the car. Now, you can see in this photograph, the upper left corner photo, the black and white photo, shows the Peugeot as it looked when it was in James Melton's collection. It had been modified and changed over the years. Melton does refer to it as the best car in my collection, though. But when Dr. Shear gets it, he has it completely restored in 1961. And they went back to the original look of the car. There's some documentation that shows what the car originally looked like, and that's how it was done, with a few little custom twists on it. The original carbide lamps that were, you see in the black and white photograph, were replaced with electric lamps with ruby-like jewels around the outside rim of them. They're shaped like bullets. They're incredible looking things. And you can imagine with the lights on and those red things on, they're extraordinary looking. Also, on the very back of the car, Dr. Shear always would find a place to put his monogram, and there's a brass plaque on the car with his monogram on it. There's another brass plaque on the car, actually, that I love, which is on the door sill, which is Henri Labordette's signature on it, engraved on it. And I always like to think it's kind of like Frank Lloyd Wright at MoMA, signing the building. Labordette was so proud of his work that he would autograph his masterpieces.
Well, they're certainly worth autographing. They are absolutely works of art. As we finish up with our last question, we have some questions coming through on our chat section, but also if you're watching on Facebook and the chat, please feel free to post any questions or comments, and we'll get to those here in a minute. But I think, the last biggest burning question is, how does it get from Samuel Shear's collection to the Seal Cove Auto Museum?
Well, indeed. In 1964, Richard Payne, who was the founder of the Seal Cove Auto Museum, signed a contract to buy 41 of Dr. Samuel Shear's automobiles. And they were acquired over a few years, but that commitment was made in 1964, and that is how the Peugeot ended up eventually coming to the Seal Cove Auto Museum. Now since she's been, I mean, this is now what, 1964, 65, maybe it was when the car actually physically came into the museum. That's a long time. And over the years, it's been probably the most popular car on display at the museum. It certainly was when you were director there, Rainey, and when I was director. We always would ask our visitors, what was your favorite car? And 9 times out of 10, it would be that boat car over there. That's really cool. So it's been loaned out to our friends at the Outset Transportation Museum. It even went to England a number of years ago and traveled there. And went to France to Retromobile and was displayed there. So it's been around. It's been shown at the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance. It's been shown at the Amelia Island Concours d'Elegance. So the car is well known. There's actually a replica built on a Rolls-Royce chassis of the car. So yeah, it's a fabulous automobile. And for anybody who hasn't been to the museum, boy, if you ever need an excuse to go, there it is.
No kidding. Absolutely. Some of the questions you've already answered, and I would just encourage people to continue to post some things if you've got questions. We're almost done. Someone asks, hi, Roberto, have you been in Windsor, Vermont lately?
I'm in Windsor as we speak, surrounded by 14.5 inches of snow that we had yesterday, or day before yesterday.
This is Dell and Chris, who also knew the answer was Billy Leeds. We needed a spoiler alert for their knowledge, but they do want to know, was the fake Anastasia or the real Anastasia cousin to Princess Xena? Was there any relation between either the original princess or the imposter?
No, I haven't found actually a familial relationship. I've only that Anastasia had met Princess Xena when she was when they were both quite young.
And then you already answered this question, but I'll just make note that Dal and Chris also asked, the headlights on the Peugeot from the black and white picture look different from the color picture. Yeah. So you addressed those changes, which, I mean, those headlights they look like something straight out of the Jetsons. they're really cool.
They do. It's an interesting look. They definitely are inspired by bullets. We think of General Motors in the 1950s using bullet shapes and machine gun like exhaust pipes sticking out of the first Corvette, and Cadillacs, with these bombs out the front. But these are absolutely look like bullets and were inspired by artillery shells from the First World War. And they're electric, and say, I can just imagine them lit up. They must be sensational with those red ruby glass around the outside lit up. Fabulous.
Yeah. And the last question we have is, does the museum run the car periodically?
It hasn't run for a while. I think the last outing was 2014, which was...
I started there in January 2014, and it never ran when I was there, so it must have been
Well, I'm trying to think when it went. Maybe it was 13. When it went to Amelia Island was the last time she really got exercised. There is a movement now. They're going, from what I understand, the team at the museum going through the cars again and are identifying a number of them that need to be restarted up and run and worked on. And I'm sure that the Peugeot will be on that list. So at some point, maybe even this summer, who knows, you might see an announcement that come to the museum on Cars for Coffee Day, and we're going to start at the Peugeot. Let's hope.
Well, we have some volunteers. Del and Chris are volunteering to come and exercise the cars for the museum. So it sounds like they know how to get a hold of you. Well, these half an hours always go really fast for us. We had one more question pop up. Let me just double check it. The tiny car with James, Melton, and 2 dogs, is that the same one as the one at Seal Cove?
No, I wish it was. I thought it was at first. But that photograph is so fine of Melton in the car with Rex the dog that I was able to take a photograph of our car, or the one that's at the museum, and blow it up to the same size, take the photo at the same angle, and look at the two, and you do begin immediately to see the differences. So unfortunately, no, we don't have we can't claim that one as a James Melton car.
Yeah. So these half an hours go really fast. I would just say to anyone on either the Zoom link with us or Facebook Live, the Seal Cove Auto Museum will open back up in May, and it's a very safe and easy place to visit socially distanced because the warehouse is enormous. And I think you had a sense that even if you're not a car person, these cars are stories about people, fascinating, interesting people that just really lend a better understanding of history and where we've come in, to how we live our lives today. And that was one of the things I really always enjoyed about working over there and with this team of people. So I would encourage everyone to have a chance to go over and check out that museum this summer. They have a great exhibit on women's suffrage and the role that the automobile played in advancing women's rights. So that'll be up again this summer, I believe, right?
It's going to stay this summer, and just a little note pop up. The automobile that is featured in the car is a Saxon, and by golly, that one was just started up and running just very recently. In fact, I think there's a link on Facebook at the museum's Facebook page where you can actually watch it run.
Perfect. Well, Roberto, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your research and this really fascinating story on the 1913 Peugeot. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Bar Harbor Bank and Trust, for your continued sponsorship. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with Marie Yarbrough from the National Park Service, talking again about the perspective and process of a historian researching and going through the process of uncovering. In this case, it will be Thomas Fraser, one of the first African-American property owners over in Gouldsboro. So hopefully you'll have a chance to visit us again in 2 weeks. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Take care, Roberto.
Thank you, Rainey. Thank you very much, and take care to everybody. And I hope at some point I'll be able to get back up to the island.
We hope so too. See ya.